Excuse me. All right, today we are going to look at some more JavaScript examples. Remember that we're not trying to make you an expert in JavaScript. It would take longer than that. But what I do want to do with this unit in the class is to show you the basic idea of JavaScript. In other words, what does JavaScript mean to accomplish on a page? Because so far we have the HTML, which defines the content of the page, the links, the text, the images, and so on. We then have the CSS, which specifies the physical appearance of the page. In other words, is the font Times New Roman or is it Arial? Is the color of the type blue or black? As well as the positioning of our different elements on the page. You know, HTML contains sort of conceptually different sections of the page. And through our CSS, we say where those physically are going to appear on the page, because they can be stacked vertically, they can be stacked side by side, they can be stacked any number of ways. So we went over a couple examples last time. We started out with this one. Whereas if you put your mouse over it, it reveals the spoiler. If you take your mouse out, it hides the spoiler again. Just so that we can look at this for review. We initially, through our CSS, set the spoilers to be have no display. That's a little different than the visibility. If you have display of none, then it does not take up any space. If you make it invisible, then it still takes up that space on the screen. You just don't see it. So usually I go with display of none as opposed to invisible. So this initially will make anything that has a class, any paragraph that has a class of spoiler, it won't display it. So that's this and this. All right. So when the page initially loads, that's what we get. We then have some JavaScript using the on mouse over event. Remember, in our sort of recipe of how these JavaScript code works is that we have the user typically doing something that triggers an action. They could be clicking a button, they could be clicking on an image, they could be clicking a link, they could be putting their mouse over an image or their mouse over a link. All right, that's what initiates the JavaScript. And in this case, we're using on mouse over and on mouse out. So when the user puts the mouse over this paragraph and this paragraph, we then kick into action. And what do? We use the DOM. The DOM stands for Document Object Model. And the Document Object Model is a way to refer to different things on the page. In this case, on mouse over, we find the thing on the page that has the ID spoiler 1. That's what this says. Document means it's somewhere on the page. Get element by ID means that we're going to get the thing on the page that has a certain ID. And remember, while classes are not unique, IDs are unique. You can only have one thing on a page with a given ID. And what are we going to do with it? If the mouse goes over that paragraph, we're going to change its style. Specifically, we're going to change its display to block. And when the user takes their mouse out of it, we hide it again and change the display back to none. Notice how we use single quotes inside because the double quotes indicate the end of the statement. The JavaScript statement goes from here to here. And if we want to use quotations inside of that, we must use the single quotes. We use the double quotes the browser would get confused and think that this was the end of the JavaScript statement, and then wouldn't know what to do with the rest, and you'd get an error because that's not a complete JavaScript statement. So we do the same thing if the mouse goes out of that paragraph, we make it disappear again. The code down here is the same thing, all right? The only difference is we're hiding and showing another paragraph. In this case, we're showing and hiding this paragraph. All right, I'm going to show you a slightly different way of doing this. Now remember, for your assignment in JavaScript, you only have to implement some small piece of JavaScript in your code. Now don't directly copy something I did, but you're welcome to take what I did and adapt it one way or another. So let's look at this other version of spoiler. Show spoiler, this uses a mouse click. And we can change the color of that. We don't have any action to hide it again. Let's look at what makes this different. There's really not much different about this. I was mistaken. I thought there was some more stuff in this. But we have, instead of on mouse over, we have a button. Notice it's not a submit button. We're not sending data to a server. And that's key. The way JavaScript works is it does its thing without sending a new request to the server. We certainly could add a button to hide it again. And we have this to change the color. And we change the color by, again, finding the ID of the thing that we want to change, changing its style, and changing its background color to a different color. All right. Here's some more examples. Right? And this I've done a little bit more with the CSS code. Again, keep in mind that I try to keep my examples fairly straightforward, and your pages should look like completed web pages. I have two buttons on here, one to set the text big and one to go back to a normal size text. I then have menu items that sort of pull down, sort of like Windows Explorer does. If you go into Windows Explorer, the old version of it, you used to be able to click on it and see the things underneath it. Now it takes you into that folder. So I guess Windows Explorer is not a good explanation. But when I click on this, I get my submenu items. Click on this, I get my submenu items, submenu. What happens if I click again? It makes them disappear. So let's look at this and the functionality that we get in this case. I have a little bit more CSS code. I make my header 100% of the page and I float it to the left. I make my nav have a width of 30% and float it to the left. I make my section with 70%, I float it to the left. So that's why these things are, header goes all the way across. This takes up 30% of the page, this takes up 70%. They're side by side because I can put 30% and 40% on the same line. Then finally my footer is 100%. We can easily see this by putting in different colors. And I won't do that. I was going to do that, but you can try it on your own if you want to do it. All right. My buttons go and say, on click, document get element by ID main. That's this main section here. Change the style of it and change the font size to 2M. If you remember when we covered font sizes, M relates to how much is it emphasized. In other words, how much is it bigger than normal? So 2M would be that the font is twice as big as it normally is. Again, same recipe. We have an event. We have some interaction that the user performs. We get the element by ID. So we find the thing on the page that we want to change. And then we change something about it, the style and the font size, and we change it to a value. Remember, if you make a mistake, and JavaScript is case sensitive, but if I forgot about that and typed in S for style here and saved it, doesn't work. Go to the JavaScript console under More Tools, Developer Tools, and look at the console, and it will tell me sort of. Cannot set property of undefined. Well, this at the very least tells me what line we're talking about. And the line that we're talking about is on line 47. And if we look at that line, say 47? The number's a little bit off. But at any rate, we can tell that there's an error, and that's why it's not working. Another thing that you can do is you can put in console log to show where things are. And we'll take a look at that in a minute. All right, so let's correct this and get back to work. So this is very similar to the other thing. The difference is that we're changing the size of the text instead of that. All right, now let's look at what happens when we click on one of these menu items. And we're clicking on the LI. We have a function called toggle menu. Now, what do I mean by toggle? What I mean by toggle is it's like a switch. It's like a light switch. If you flick the switch and it's currently off, that will turn the lights on. If the lights are currently on and you flick the switch, it will turn them off. So it does the opposite. If it's on, it makes it off. If it's off, it makes it on. Our toggle works the same thing as that. If the menu, the submenu is hidden, when you click on this, it displays the submenu. If the submenu is visible and you click on this, it makes the submenu go away. Now that's a little more extensive than what we have done in the past because there's a condition here. It's what's called conditional processing. If one thing is true, we do something. If one thing is not true, we do something else. Right? Now, because this is going to take several statements, we wrap this up in a function. And toggle menu is the name of a JavaScript function. And then we pass that JavaScript function an argument. Now, this is the same as functions and argument in any other programming language you might have had. But in our case, the argument tells the function which submenu to display or hide. So whenever you have an argument in a function that says what you're going to operate on, what you're going to perform your calculation or action or whatever on. In this case, we're going to make the either submenu 1 visible or invisible. We do the same thing too with this by making submenu 2 visible or invisible in submenu 3. So notice this code is the same. The only difference is we're giving it a different argument. So we're telling it to show or hide a different submenu. Now let's look at that function. The function is defined in a script tag. All right. The script tag is similar to the style tag. The style tag tells the browser that you're not in HTML language, you're in CSS language. So interpret it that way. The script tag tells the browser the following code is not HTML or CSS, instead it's JavaScript. So everything between the start and the end script tag is some JavaScript code. We declare a function by putting in the word function, the name of the function, and any arguments it has. Again, an argument is what the function is going to do something with or to. All right. So when we call this here, that value submenu gets placed in this variable arg. So whenever we refer to arg in the function, we're really referring to submenu 1. In this case, when we call the function, we give it an argument of submenu 3. What that means is submenu 3 gets put into the variable arg, and anywhere we say arg in the function, we can substitute submenu 3. So what it does is this. There's an if statement. Oh, by the way, these curly brackets or braces are used to sort of group things together, group instructions together. And it's very important when you code JavaScript that you keep your code neat. Notice how this brace lines up with this F, because we have a brace at the start of the function, we have a brace at the end of the function. Everything in between it is the code in that function. We had another function, we could define it down here, and it too would have its braces. Now we have what's called a conditional statement, an if statement. And this is going to evaluate if this statement is true or false. Now notice I have two equal signs. Those two equal signs are doing a comparison. When I use a single equal sign, I'm doing an assignment. I'm setting something on the page to be equal to something. When I have two equal signs, I'm asking a question. Is this true? So is the display property of that argument, that submenu that we passed in, is the display property block? In other words, is it visible? We could comment our code if we wanted to and say, is submenu visible? These two slashes indicate it's a comment, which means that the browser ignores it, but it's good practice to put comments in, because if you come back to a page a while after you've done it, or someone else goes to maintain a page that you worked on, sometimes it's good to have an explanation of what the different instructions mean. And then if it's visible, we're going to hide it. If invisible, then we're going to show it. Now just think if we added more, if we tried to put this all as part of this event, you'd have a lot of instructions in here instead of this one simple instruction. And it would make your code very messy. And then it would make adding new menu items messy and new submenus. In this case, all we have to do if we wanted to add a new menu item with its own submenu, we could just copy this code, change it, I'm designating what the new menu item is. And we're good to go. Should say submenu 4, but get the idea. One criteria for whether a program is good or not, if code is good or not, is how easy it is to change. All right, code that is easy to change is generally considered to be better than code that is difficult to change. Why is this? Well, because we know that change in code is more or less inevitable. Pretty much any code you write is likely to be at some point changed to do something else. That's sort of the law of programming. And therefore, the more you can do when you initially write the code to make it easy to change by doing things like indenting properly. Notice this indenting says that the function starts here and ends here. The if statement starts here and ends here. Starts here and ends here. The else statement starts here and starts here. And the comments explain what each line does. The more you can do to make it easy to change, the better it is. Now let's look at this if statement. We're asking, is the display property of this submenu block? That is the equivalent of saying, is it visible? If it's visible, we hide it. And how do we hide it? By setting the display property to none. Else is what we do if this isn't true. So it's like a fork in the road. We have a statement, we do one thing if it's true, we do another thing if it's not true. Now, we don't always have to have an else. Like, we could have a checkbox that said, is this order taxable or not? And if it is taxable, then we do the tax calculation. And if it's not taxable, we don't do anything. But in this case, there's an else because we want to do one thing if the if statement is true, another thing if the if statement is false. So that's what this does in this code, is it's a fork in the road. We're either going to hide it or show it, depending on whether it's already visible or not. Now I have some variations of this. Let's look at them. I have menu 1. That shows it if you put the mouse over it. So we have an on mouse over. No toggling in this one. We have a menu 2, which you can click it and hide it. That's like the example we just looked at, but I don't have the code for making the text larger in it. I still have the toggle function. And then I have menu 3, which It's the same thing, except it uses a mouse over and mouse out. So this one probably would be worth looking at. Now, on mouse over, we display the submenu and we change the background of this LI to be yellow. On mouse out, we make it hidden again. And we make it white, which really doesn't matter because, well, yes, it does matter. If we didn't have this in here, then the LI would stay yellow. So we change it back to white. Now there's two instructions here that we put on the on mouse over event. Notice that unlike previous examples, after the first instruction, we have a semicolon, and then of our second JavaScript statement before we finish up, before we close the double quote. Now we learn to do this a better way by making a function for this. So I could write a function to show and write a function to hide. In fact, let's do that. I'm going to create a script. It's going to contain my JavaScript code. I'm going to create a function called show. And it's going to take two arguments. It's going to take the LI and the submenu. So when we do the mouse over, we want to show not submenu 1, but whatever the argument is. And we want to change the background color to the background to the LI that we got passed as an argument. And I got to do some undo. Now over here, when I call it, I can say on mouse over show this, which is this tag, this very tag that I have here, and submenu 1. Let's make sure it works. It doesn't. There's a bug in it. Notice I only changed that 1. Let's look at my developer tools. Invalid or unexpected token around line 17. It's not very descriptive. Got an extra quote. Yes, it's that picky. telling us it can't read the property of null, which means that oh, this needs to be in quotes because I want that literal name to be display to be put in there. Remember to use single quotes. My suggestion, as always, when you're writing any code like this, is to do a little bit, then test. And there we go. It's working. I could subsequently write a hide function, and I could change all of these if I wanted to, but I'm not going to spend the time doing that. All right, we have two more examples to look at. One is when we have forms. If we search for something, we did this earlier in the class. What if we don't type anything in there? Well, that's simple validation. On submit of that form, we call a function called validate function. And the results of that function are going to get returned to the on submit event. So if a true is returned to it, we go ahead and submit the page. If a false is returned to it, we don't submit it. And here we look to make sure that there's a value in the field on the form Q. If there is not, if it's empty, when we trim it, that is get rid of the spaces at the beginning and spaces at the end, our return value is false. This form is not valid. And we set the class of QLabel to error. So that's going to make the label red. And we give the inner HTML, we just put right in here, put in the phrase must enter something. This calculates, I think, the circumference of a circle. If we put in 3, circumference is 18.84. We put in something else, tells us it must enter a number. We're not submitting the form in this case, but on click of the button, we're calling calculate. Calculates looks to make sure that the radius, it checks to see if the radius is not a number or if it's empty. And if either of those are true, it displays on the page must enter a number. Otherwise, it does the calculation and displays the results. How do you know all the functions you can do? Look up JavaScript DOM. And it will show you a list of things. All right. I think we have a couple versions of the last example. Pictures at a zoo. This is a very common sort of function where we have a list of thumbnails and we then have a list of big images. And in this case, when we put our mouse over the thumbnail, we get the big image. Now, it really helps make things clean if they're the same dimensions. The thumbnails, that is. Notice that this one is a little taller than this one. For the main image, it doesn't matter quite as much, but for the thumbnails, it's good to crop the images so that they're all the same thing. So let's look at the code here. We have some style rules to position things and all that. On mouse over of the thumbnail, the first thumbnail is called 1T for the first thumbnail. Find a thing on the page that has the ID of big and change its SRC property. That's the thing with the big. Change the SRC to 1 JPEG. Change it to 2 JPEG, change it to 3 JPEG, depending on what they put their mouse over, which thumbnail. Now again, we're just addressing these properties. It's like someone is going in and changing the code for that, but it's not a person doing it, it's our JavaScript doing that. And therefore we can change the big picture in the center just by the position of the mouse. And if the mouse is over one of the thumbnails, it changes the big image to that. This is really similar, except using a click method. And I do a little bit more accessible way. I have a function to change the image that sets both the new image and gives alt text. I also have an access key of 1 here. That's for accessibility. So if I do Alt 1, Alt 2, or Alt 3, I can go to one of the other images. That's defined by the access key here. So this one pays much more attention to accessibility. Now remember, for your assignment, adapt one of these, go find your own and do something with it. Don't copy directly what I've done. Take it and modify it. Make it your own. Make your pages look like complete web pages. Now, this is the last lecture in this class. Next week is week 15, which is the final week of classes. I will be available both in BU 102 in person and online at my WebEx room. And we'll be there from 9 to 10 prior to my regular office hours to give you an opportunity to show me where you're at with your project. You all have done pretty well this semester, and you've done some really exciting things. And I would like to see you keep that up and really do a great job on the project. So by showing me the project early, I can give you feedback and change it from maybe a good project to a great project. And this would not be uncommon in a real scenario. If in this case, I'm playing the role of the customer. So whoever you're developing the website for, you wouldn't wait till you're to the very end of the process to show them the final work. You would have some time to review and that so they can get their feedback in before you finalize the website. So it's a very common thing to do. All right, so this is the last lecture. Next week, show me your project. Show up in person or show up online. The following week, after next week is the week of December 2nd, I think, yeah. And then the week of December 9th, I believe your projects are due on December 11th. Everything else is due by that day as well. So if you have missed assignments or you need to redo an assignment or whatever, that has to be done by the end of the day December 11th. Now, if there's something that happens that causes you to not be able to make that deadline, there's something big, hospitalization or whatever, talk to me and we can talk about getting an incomplete for the class. All right, that's all I had today. We will see you in lab or online or in person for the website review.